Sometimes the places we run to for safety are the very places we should run from. Maya Chen pressed her frozen hands against the farmhouse door, her breath forming desperate clouds in the Montana winter air. 8 months pregnant and homeless, she'd driven her dying car 300 miles based on a lawyer's letter about an inheritance. A grandfather she barely remembered leaving her his land. The house shouldn't have had power, shouldn't have had heat, shouldn't have had fresh groceries in the refrigerator. But it did, and in the kitchen, she found his handwriting in a journal entry dated yesterday. Maya will arrive soon. Everything is ready. The man had been dead for 6 months. As she turned the pages, her hands trembling, she discovered detailed notes about her life, her struggles, her pregnancy, even her favorite childhood songs, written in his careful script. But how could a dead man know she was coming? How could he have prepared this place for her arrival? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maya's legs gave out beneath her, and she sank into the kitchen chair, the journal clutching to her swollen belly like a lifeline. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing her panic. She flipped through more pages, each entry more impossible than the last. December 10th, 2023, Maya lost her apartment today. The eviction notice came at 9:17 a.m. She cried for exactly 14 minutes before packing her car. That was last week. She remembered crying in her empty studio, the sound echoing off bare walls. But how could he have known the exact time? She'd been alone. December 8th, 2023. The baby is a girl. Maya doesn't know yet. She won't find out until spring, if she makes it that long. Maya's hand flew to her stomach. She'd specifically asked the ultrasound technician not to tell her the gender. The appointment had been private, just her and the medical student who'd done the scan as a favor. No one else knew. The kitchen felt too warm suddenly, suffocating. She stood on unsteady feet and moved to the window, peering out at the endless white expanse that surrounded the farmhouse. Her grandfather's property stretched beyond what she could see, bordered by dense pine forest that looked black against the snow. The nearest neighbor was probably miles away. Her breath fogged the glass as she studied the yard. No tire tracks except her own led to the house. No footprints marked the pristine snow. Yet someone had been here, recently. The milk in the refrigerator didn't expire until next week. The bread was soft and fresh. The thermostat had been set to exactly 72 degrees, the temperature she preferred but had never told anyone about. Maya tried to remember her grandfather, but the memories were fragments at best. She'd been maybe 7 the last time she'd seen him, before the family fight that her mother never fully explained. Something about his dangerous obsessions and unhealthy experiments. Her mother had forbidden contact after that, and by the time Maya was old enough to reach out on her own, other things had taken priority. Veterinary school, then the poker games that started as stress relief and became something darker. The mounting debts, the dropped classes, the scholarship she'd gambled away along with her future. She'd been living in her car for 3 weeks when the lawyer's letter found her at the shelter. Thomas Chen's granddaughter, sole heir to 40 acres in rural Montana. She'd driven straight through, stopping only for gas she could barely afford, following GPS coordinates to a place she wasn't even sure existed. But it did exist. And somehow, impossibly, it had been waiting for her. The journal trembled in her hands as she read another entry. November 15th, 2023. Maya's gambling addiction stems from more than stress. She's trying to outrun the dreams, the ones where she's running through corridors that shouldn't exist, chased by something that shouldn't be possible. She doesn't remember the summers she spent here as a child. The treatments worked too well. Treatments? What treatments? Maya stumbled backward, knocking over a kitchen stool. It clattered against the hardwood floor, the sound sharp and wrong in the quiet house. She'd never told anyone about the dreams, the recurring nightmares that had plagued her since college, endless hallways, the sensation of being hunted, waking up with the taste of copper in her mouth and scratches on her arms she couldn't explain. A sound from upstairs made her freeze. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, crossing the ceiling above her head. Someone else was in the house. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs as she listened. The footsteps paused directly overhead, then continued toward what she assumed was the staircase. She looked around frantically for a weapon, settling on a heavy cast-iron skillet from the stove. The weight of it in her hands was reassuring, even as her pregnant body protested the sudden movement. The footsteps began descending the stairs. Maya positioned herself behind the kitchen island, the skillet raised, trying to control her breathing. She thought about running, but her car keys were on the counter, and in her condition, she wouldn't make it 10 feet in the snow before whoever was upstairs caught her. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs and stopped. "Hello?" Maya's voice cracked. "I know you're there." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the house's heating system humming to life and the wind rattling the windows. Maya strained to hear movement, but there was nothing. No breathing, no shifting weight, no sound at all. After what felt like an eternity, she crept toward the kitchen entrance, the skillet still raised. The living room beyond was exactly as she'd left it when she'd first entered, warm, welcoming, and completely empty. But on the coffee table sat a photograph that hadn't been there before. Maya approached it slowly, her bare feet silent on the hardwood. In the photograph, a young girl with her face stood next to an older man she now recognized as her grandfather. They were both smiling, standing in front of what looked like a laboratory door marked with symbols she didn't recognize. The girl in the photograph was definitely her, but Maya had no memory of ever being in that place. Maya's hands shook as she picked up the photograph, the cast-iron skillet forgotten on the coffee table beside it. The image was crisp, recent, not the faded quality she'd expect from a 20-year-old photo, yet there she was, maybe 6 or 7 years old, wearing a yellow sundress she vaguely remembered loving. Her grandfather's hand rested on her shoulder, protective and familiar in a way that made her chest ache. She traced the strange symbols on the laboratory door with her fingertip. They looked almost like mathematical equations, but wrong somehow, as if the numbers bent in directions that shouldn't exist. Behind the glass of the door, she could make out shapes in shadow, tall structures that might have been equipment or something else entirely. The baby kicked hard, jolting Maya back to the present. She was 8 months pregnant, alone in a house that defied logic, holding proof of a childhood she couldn't remember. The rational part of her mind, the part that had earned her acceptance to veterinary school before everything fell apart, suggested she was having some kind of breakdown. Pregnancy hormones, stress from months of homelessness, the shock of inheriting property from a grandfather she barely knew. It would explain the impossible journal entries, the sense that someone was watching her. But it wouldn't explain the photograph appearing while she'd been in the kitchen, or the fact that the house had been prepared for her arrival with surgical precision. Maya sank into her grandfather's armchair, the leather still holding the impression of someone else's body. The scent that clung to the fabric was familiar, pipe tobacco and something medicinal, like the antiseptic smell of a veterinary clinic. It triggered a flash of memory so sudden and vivid it made her gasp, small hands reaching toward caged animals, her grandfather's voice saying, gently, "Maya, they're not quite ready to come home yet." The memory dissolved as quickly as it had come, leaving her wondering if she'd imagined it. Her mother had always insisted Maya had a vivid imagination as a child, making up elaborate stories about places that didn't exist and people who weren't there. "You were always too smart for your own good," her mother would say, usually while confiscating whatever book Maya was reading. "Some things are better left alone." Maya had stopped asking about her grandfather when she was 12, after her mother's reactions grew increasingly volatile. By high school, she'd convinced herself he probably didn't even remember she existed. By college, she'd been too busy with coursework and clinicals to think about family mysteries. Then came the poker games. First just Friday nights with classmates, then weekend tournaments, then the private games with stakes she couldn't afford to lose. She'd told herself she was in control, that she was just good at reading people and calculating odds. The same skills that made her excel at diagnosing sick animals would surely translate to reading tells at a poker table. But somewhere between her first big win and her final devastating loss, she'd stopped being able to distinguish between the two. The rush of a successful diagnosis felt exactly like hitting a straight flush, and the crushing weight of losing a patient mimicked the hollow ache of a bad beat. The dreams had started around the same time. Always the same, running through sterile corridors lined with doors that wouldn't open, something pursuing her that she never quite saw. She'd wake up exhausted, with dirt under her fingernails and scratches on her arms that she'd convince herself came from her part-time job at the animal shelter. Maya looked down at her arms now. Even in the warm light of the farmhouse, she could see the faint white lines of old scars. She'd always assumed they came from years of working with frightened animals. But now she wondered. The scratches in her dreams had always felt so real. The journal lay open on the side table where she'd left it. Against her better judgment, she picked it up and flipped to a random page. July 15th, 2003. Maya's treatment is progressing well. The memory suppression is holding and she shows no signs of recall. Her mother believes she's simply at summer camp. It's better this way, safer for everyone. The girl has a natural affinity for the work, but she's too young to understand the implications. When she's older, when the research is complete, perhaps then we can explain. Summer camp. Maya remembered her mother dropping her off at a place with cabins and a lake, but the details were strangely fuzzy. She could recall making friendship bracelets and swimming lessons, but when she tried to picture faces or specific events, there was nothing. Just a vague sense of happiness and the lingering smell of antiseptic. Outside, the wind picked up, howling around the corners of the house. Snow pelted the windows with increasing fury, and Maya realized she was truly trapped here until the storm passed. Even if she wanted to leave, and she wasn't sure she did anymore, her ancient Honda wouldn't make it through what was shaping up to be a blizzard. The house settled around her with soft creaks and sighs, as if it were alive and breathing. Maya had just closed her eyes, letting the chair's familiar scent wash over her when the lights went out. The sudden darkness was absolute, as if someone had thrown a thick blanket over the entire world. The heating system's gentle hum died with a mechanical wheeze, leaving only the sound of wind battering the windows and her own ragged breathing. Even the digital clock on the microwave, which she could see from the living room, had gone dark. But then, from somewhere deep beneath the house, came a low, thrumming sound, like machinery powering up. Maya's heart rate spiked as a pale blue glow began seeping through the floorboards near the kitchen. Not the warm yellow of emergency lighting, but something cold and unnatural that made the hair on her arms stand up. The light pulsed in rhythm with the thrumming, growing brighter with each beat. She fumbled for her phone, its flashlight beam weak and pathetic against the strange illumination coming from below. The battery showed 12%. She'd forgotten to charge it in the car, another mistake in a long string of them that had led her to this impossible place. The journal had fallen to the floor when the lights cut out. As Maya bent to retrieve it, the blue glow intensified, and she could swear she felt warmth radiating up through the hardwood. Her grandfather's handwriting seemed to shimmer in the strange light as she opened to a page near the back. December 17th, 2023. The convergence begins tonight. Maya will have to choose, accept what she is and continue the work, or remain ignorant and risk everything. The baby complicates matters, but perhaps that's intentional. Perhaps the timeline requires her to have something worth protecting. Today's date. Maya's hands went numb, and she nearly dropped the journal again. The entry was written in the same careful script as all the others, but the ink looked wet, as if it had been written moments ago. The thrumming from below grew louder, joined by what sounded like hydraulic systems engaging. Somewhere, in the darkness, metal scraped against metal with a groan that seemed to come from the bones of the house itself. The blue light began moving, shifting beneath different sections of the floor as if something large was ascending from the depths. Maya struggled to her feet, her pregnant belly making her clumsy in the dark. She needed to find a basement door, needed to understand what was happening beneath her. But as she moved toward the kitchen, following the strongest concentration of blue light, her phone's weak beam illuminated something that made her freeze. Wet footprints crossed the kitchen floor, not her own, which were still damp from the snow, but larger prints that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. They led from the back door to a section of the kitchen she hadn't fully explored, where what she'd taken for a pantry door stood slightly ajar. The thrumming stopped abruptly, plunging the house into a silence so complete it felt oppressive. Even the wind had died. Maya could hear her own heartbeat, rapid and irregular, and the soft sound of her breathing. The blue light continued to pulse beneath the floor, but slower now, almost like a sleeping animal's respiration. She approached the pantry door, every instinct screaming at her to run. But where could she go? Her car was buried under a foot of snow, the nearest town was 30 miles away, and she was 8 months pregnant in the middle of a Montana winter. Besides, something deeper than fear was pulling her forward, a recognition she couldn't name, as if her body remembered this place, even when her mind couldn't. The door swung open at her touch, revealing not a pantry but a staircase descending into blue-tinged darkness. The steps were wooden, worn smooth by years of use, with a handrail that felt familiar under her palm. At the bottom she could see the edge of what looked like a laboratory, stainless steel surfaces reflecting the strange light, and shapes that might have been equipment or specimen containers. Maya's phone buzzed with a low battery warning, the screen casting harsh white light across her face. She had maybe 5 minutes of power left, enough to explore or enough to call for help, assuming she could get a signal. But help with what? How could she explain any of this to anyone? The baby moved restlessly inside her, pressing against her ribs as if trying to get closer to the blue light emanating from below. Maya placed her free hand on her stomach, feeling the strong, steady rhythm of her daughter's heartbeat. Yes, her daughter, just as her grandfather's journal had predicted. The realization should have shocked her more than it did. As she stood at the threshold between the ordinary world above and whatever waited below, Maya understood that this was her moment of choice. She could retreat to the living room, wait out the storm, and leave in the morning with nothing but questions and the growing certainty that she was losing her mind. Or she could descend those stairs and finally learn the truth about her grandfather, her forgotten summers and the dreams that had driven her to seek escape in gambling and risk. The basement pulsed with blue light, patient and waiting, like a heartbeat made visible. Maya's foot hovered over the first step, her body frozen between descending and retreating. The blue light pulsed hypnotically below, but with each pulse, her doubts grew stronger. What if this was all some elaborate delusion brought on by months of stress and homelessness? What if her mind had finally snapped under the weight of losing everything, her career, her home, her sense of self? She pressed her free hand against her swollen belly, feeling her daughter's movements grow more agitated. The baby had been so active since they'd arrived at the farmhouse, as if something about this place excited her or terrified her. "This is insane," Maya whispered to the darkness. Her voice echoed back from the basement, distorted and strange. She'd spent 3 years in veterinary school learning to trust logic, evidence, scientific method. None of this made sense. Houses didn't maintain themselves for 6 months after their owners died. Journals didn't write themselves, and pregnant women certainly didn't go exploring mysterious underground laboratories in the middle of winter storms. The rational thing to do was turn around, barricade herself in the living room, and wait for morning. Call the sheriff's office when the storm passed, report that she'd found evidence of squatters or worse on her inherited property. Let someone else deal with whatever was happening here. But even as the thought formed, Maya knew she couldn't do it. The photograph of her childhood self haunted her, the easy familiarity between her and her grandfather, the laboratory door behind them marked with symbols that made her brain itch just looking at them, and the journal entries that seemed to know things about her no one should know. Her gambling addiction, her dreams, the gender of her unborn child. Her phone's battery indicator flashed red. 3%. Maybe 2 minutes of light left, and then she'd be alone with whatever pulsed and hummed beneath the farmhouse. Maya thought about her mother, who'd died 2 years ago without ever explaining why she'd cut contact with her own father. Cancer had taken her quickly, leaving Maya with nothing but questions and a vague sense that important things had been left unsaid. "Some doors should stay closed, Maya," had been one of her mother's favorite sayings. Some secrets protect us more than the truth ever could. At the time, Maya had dismissed it as her mother's tendency toward melodrama. Now, standing at the threshold of her grandfather's secrets, she wondered if her mother had known this day would come. Had she been trying to warn her? The blue light flickered, and for a moment, Maya could swear she heard voices drifting up from below. Not words she could understand, but the cadence of conversation, as if multiple people were discussing something important, her grandfather's voice among them. She was almost certain she recognized its low, measured tone, but that was impossible. Thomas Chen had been dead for 6 months. Maya's phone screen dimmed further, conserving its last traces of power. Soon she'd have to choose between the unknown darkness below and the familiar darkness of the house above, but which was really safer? The basement might hold answers, explanations for the impossible things she'd witnessed, or it might hold something worse, something her mother had spent Maya's entire life trying to protect her from. Her daughter kicked again, harder this time, as if she too was growing impatient with her mother's indecision. Maya had spent so many months focused on survival, finding food, shelter, safety for both of them, that she'd almost forgotten what it felt like to want something beyond mere existence. But standing here, she realized she desperately wanted to understand. The dreams that had driven her to gambling, the gaps in her childhood memories, the sense that her entire life had been shaped by forces she couldn't see. What kind of mother would she be if she passed this same ignorance on to her daughter? What if whatever was happening here, whatever her grandfather had been involved in, would eventually find them anyway? At least here, now she had some small measure of choice. Maya's phone battery finally died, plunging her into the blue-tinged darkness. The laboratory light was stronger now, bright enough to see by, but it cast everything in an otherworldly glow that made her feel like she was already dreaming. She gripped the handrail tighter, its worn smoothness somehow comforting under her palm. One step, then another. The wooden stairs creaked softly under her weight, but they felt solid, real. Whatever else might be happening here, the physical world still operated by familiar rules. She could still turn back. She could still choose safety over truth. But with each step downward, the pull grew stronger. Not just curiosity now, but recognition, as if her body remembered this descent even when her conscious mind couldn't, as if she'd walked these stairs before, many times, in the forgotten summers of her childhood. The voices below grew clearer. Her grandfather's among them, impossible as it seemed, and underneath it all, a sound like machinery preparing for something momentous. Maya reached the bottom of the stairs and stepped into a world that defied everything she thought she knew about reality. The underground laboratory stretched far beyond what should have been possible beneath the modest farmhouse. Gleaming metal surfaces caught and reflected the blue light emanating from dozens of cylindrical containers lining the walls. Each container held specimens suspended in luminescent fluid, not the preserved animals she'd glimpsed from above, but something far more complex. Tissues that pulsed with their own rhythm, cellular structures that seemed to shift and reorganize as she watched. But it was the sound of her grandfather's voice, clear and unmistakable, that made her knees nearly buckle. "The temporal displacement is accelerating," Thomas Chen's voice carried from somewhere deeper in the laboratory. "We need to begin the integration process before the window closes." Maya pressed herself against the cold metal wall, her heart hammering so hard she was certain it could be heard throughout the facility. The voice wasn't coming from speakers or recordings. It had the natural resonance of someone physically present speaking in the next room, which was impossible. She'd attended his funeral 6 months ago, had watched them lower his coffin into frozen ground. "Phase 3 specimens are responding well to the new environment," another voice replied. Younger, female, unfamiliar. "But the subject's arrival has disrupted the temporal field. We're seeing fluctuations across all monitoring stations." Maya forced herself to move deeper into the laboratory, following the voices toward their source. Her bare feet made no sound on the smooth floor, which felt warm despite the winter storm raging above. The blue light grew stronger as she progressed, revealing equipment she couldn't begin to identify, machines with crystalline components that hummed with energy, computers displaying data streams that hurt her eyes to look at directly. And photographs, dozens of them, pinned to bulletin boards and scattered across workstations. All of her. Maya as a child, laughing in this very laboratory. Maya at 8, carefully handling what looked like a small animal that seemed to shimmer between solid and translucent. Maya at 10, standing next to her grandfather while he pointed to charts covered in symbols that made her current self feel dizzy. She remembered none of it. The memory suppression is breaking down faster than predicted, her grandfather's voice continued. Maya could see an open doorway ahead, warm yellow light spilling from it in stark contrast to the blue glow of the main laboratory. 20 years of conditioning, and it's dissolving in a matter of hours. Pregnancy hormones, the female voice suggested, combined with stress and proximity to the field generators. Her neural pathways are reorganizing to protect the child. We should have anticipated this. Maya's hand instinctively moved to her belly. Protect the child from what? And what did they mean by field generators? The thrumming she'd felt through the house's bones seemed to emanate from massive cylindrical structures positioned throughout the laboratory, each one pulsing with the same rhythm as her daughter's heartbeat. She reached the doorway and peered around its edge into what appeared to be an observation room. Banks of monitors lined the walls, displaying feeds from cameras positioned throughout the farmhouse. She watched herself on multiple screens, arriving in her beaten Honda, exploring the kitchen, discovering the journal, standing at the top of these very stairs just minutes ago. They'd been watching her entire arrival, but the room appeared empty. The voices had stopped the moment she'd reached the doorway, as if they'd sensed her presence. Maya stepped inside, studying the monitors more closely. Some showed feeds from the house above, but others displayed views of places she didn't recognize, laboratories in other locations, outdoor scenes that didn't match the Montana winter landscape, and in one corner, what looked like a maternity ward filled with women who all bore her same distinctive features. A leather journal lay open on the central console, its pages covered in her grandfather's handwriting, but unlike the journal upstairs, this one's ink was still wet, words appearing even as she watched. She's reached the laboratory. Beginning final phase integration. The child will be the first true synthesis, human consciousness with temporal mobility intact. 26 years of preparation culminating in this moment. Maya's vision blurred, and for a terrifying instant, she felt her consciousness split. She was simultaneously 8 months pregnant and 8 years old, standing in this same room while her grandfather explained concepts her young mind couldn't fully grasp, but somehow accepted. The two versions of herself existed in the same space, the same moment, before snapping back into singular awareness that left her gasping. Her daughter moved restlessly, pressing against Maya's ribs with unusual strength. And for the first time since discovering her pregnancy, Maya felt afraid, not for her own safety, but for what she might be carrying. What her grandfather and his associates had been preparing for, what she'd unknowingly agreed to by walking down those stairs. The blue light pulsed brighter. Machines throughout the laboratory hummed with increasing intensity, and Maya realized with crystalline certainty that there was no going back. Whatever she'd been before entering this place, whoever she'd believed herself to be, that version of Maya Chen no longer existed. The real experiment was just beginning. The humming reached a crescendo that Maya felt in her bones, vibrating through her teeth and into her skull. She backed away from the console, but the laboratory around her was transforming. The blue light from the cylindrical containers shifted to amber, then white, illuminating details that made her stomach lurch. The specimens weren't just tissues. They were developing fetuses at various stages, suspended in fluid that sparkled with microscopic circuitry. Each container was labeled with dates spanning decades, and Maya's horrified gaze caught familiar names. Her grandmother's maiden name, her mother's middle name, and at the far end, a container marked with today's date and a single word, Maya. The awakening protocol has been initiated, her grandfather's voice returned, but now it seemed to come from everywhere at once, as if the walls themselves were speaking. Do not be afraid, my dear. Everything we've done has been to prepare you for this moment. Maya spun around, searching for the source. But the observation room remained empty except for the monitors and the still-writing journal. On the screens, she watched herself moving through the laboratory, but with a several-second delay, as if the cameras were recording events that had already happened or were about to happen. "Where are you?" she called out, her voice cracking. "Show yourself!" A new sound emerged from the depths of the facility, footsteps measured and approaching. Maya grabbed the nearest thing she could find, a metal instrument from the console that felt warm to the touch. Her daughter kicked violently, as if responding to her mother's surge of adrenaline. The footsteps stopped just outside the observation room. Maya held her breath, gripping the instrument so tightly her knuckles went white. But when the figure appeared in the doorway, it wasn't her grandfather. It was herself. The other Maya looked exactly as she did now, 8 months pregnant, wearing the same clothes, but her eyes held a knowledge that made Maya's current self feel like a child. This other version moved with confidence through the laboratory, as if she'd walked these corridors 1,000 times. "You're early," the other Maya said, her voice carrying an accent Maya didn't recognize. "But I suppose temporal displacement makes scheduling difficult." Maya backed against the console, the metal instrument trembling in her hand. This isn't real. This is a breakdown, some kind of psychotic episode brought on by stress and 26 years of suppressed memories, the other Maya finished. The neural blockers grandfather used were effective, but pregnancy changes brain chemistry. The barriers are dissolving whether we're ready or not. The monitors flickered, now showing scenes Maya definitely didn't remember, but somehow recognized. Herself at 12, working alongside her grandfather to calibrate the cylindrical containers. At 15, successfully moving a small object through what appeared to be a temporal field. At 18, tearfully agreeing to have her memories suppressed until the time was right. "The gambling," Maya whispered, understanding beginning to dawn. It wasn't addiction. It was the memories trying to surface. Dreams of displacement, of existing in multiple timelines simultaneously, the other Maya confirmed. Your unconscious mind was trying to process experiences your conscious mind couldn't access. The betting was self-medication, adrenaline to quiet the cognitive dissonance. A new alarm began sounding throughout the laboratory, and several of the specimen containers flickered from amber to urgent red. The other Maya frowned, moving to a control panel with practiced efficiency. "The convergence is happening too fast," she muttered, her fingers flying over controls that seemed to blend holographic displays with physical switches. "Your arrival destabilized the field harmonics. We have maybe 10 minutes before the whole facility phases out of this timeline." "Phases out?" Maya dropped the metal instrument, which clattered on the floor and disappeared before hitting the ground. "What does that mean?" "It means everyone and everything in this laboratory, including both versions of you and your unborn daughter, gets scattered across temporal space. No way home, no way to exist in linear time." The facility shuddered, and Maya watched several of the specimen containers simply wink out of existence. Through the observation room's doorway, she could see sections of the laboratory becoming translucent, as if reality itself was losing cohesion. "There's a way to stop it," the other Maya continued, not looking up from her controls. "But it requires integration. Your memories, my knowledge, and the temporal abilities your daughter inherited. We become one consciousness capable of stabilizing the field. And if I refuse?" The other Maya finally met her eyes, and Maya saw exhaustion there, and something that might have been compassion. "Then everything grandfather worked for dies with us. The specimens, the research, the possibility of humanity transcending linear existence, and every version of Maya Chen across all possible timelines ceases to exist." The facility shuddered again, more violently. On the monitors, Maya watched the farmhouse above, beginning to flicker like a television with poor reception. "Choose quickly," the other Maya said. "Time is running out. Literally." Maya's mind reeled as the implications crashed over her. Integration, becoming one consciousness. The words felt heavy with finality, like signing a contract written in a language she barely understood. "You're asking me to die," she said, backing further against the console. To let myself be absorbed by whatever you are. The other Maya's expression softened, and for a moment she looked vulnerable, achingly familiar. I'm asking you to become who you were always meant to be, the Maya who understood this work, who chose this path willingly before the memories were locked away. Around them, the laboratory continued its dissolution. More specimen containers vanished with soft pops of displaced air. The floor beneath Maya's feet felt increasingly insubstantial, as if she were standing on the surface of a lake that might give way at any moment. Her daughter moved frantically now, pressing against her ribs with what felt like deliberate communication. Maya had read about babies responding to their mother's stress, but this was different, almost as if the child was trying to guide her decision. Each movement seemed to pulse in rhythm with the failing containment fields. "Show me," Maya demanded. "If this integration happens, show me what I become." The other Maya hesitated, glancing at the cascading alarms. "There isn't time for—" "Make time." Maya's voice carried an authority she didn't know she possessed. "If I'm going to sacrifice everything I think I am, I need to understand what I'm becoming." The other Maya nodded reluctantly and moved to a crystalline interface Maya hadn't noticed before. When she pressed her palm against its surface, the air between them shimmered, and suddenly Maya was experiencing her other self's memories. She saw herself, integrated whole, moving through multiple timelines simultaneously. In one, she was leading a team of researchers in preventing a temporal catastrophe that would have unraveled causality itself. In another, she was teaching her grown daughter to navigate the spaces between moments. The knowledge was intoxicating, vast beyond anything her current mind could contain, but underneath it all ran a current of profound loneliness, the isolation of existing partially outside linear time. "The cost," Maya whispered, understanding flooding through her. "You can never truly connect with anyone again. You experience every conversation, every relationship across multiple timelines simultaneously. Nothing is singular, nothing is real." "Everything is real," the other Maya corrected. "But yes, linear relationships become impossible. Love becomes complicated when you experience every possible version of it at once." Maya thought of her unborn daughter, imagining holding her for the first time, watching her take first steps, teaching her to ride a bicycle. Simple moments that would be layered with infinite variations if experienced through integrated consciousness. The joy would be multiplied, but so would the sorrow, the fear, the uncertainty. Another violent shudder ran through the facility. Through the observation room's windows, Maya could see the laboratory's far wall becoming transparent. Beyond it, she glimpsed not the Montana winter landscape she expected, but a void filled with swirling colors that hurt to look at directly. "The boundary between timelines is collapsing," the other Maya said, her voice tight with concentration as she worked the controls. 5 minutes, maybe less." Maya closed her eyes, trying to center herself amid the chaos. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "Some doors should stay closed, Maya. Some secrets protect us more than the truth ever could." But her mother had also said something else. During those final days in the hospital when cancer had stripped away her usual guardedness, "I tried to protect you from his world," she'd whispered, gripping Maya's hand with surprising strength. "But I think maybe I was wrong. Maybe running from it just made everything worse. If the choice ever comes, trust your heart, not my fears." Maya's heart. What was her heart telling her now? She thought about the months of homelessness, a feeling disconnected from everyone and everything, the sense that she was sleepwalking through a life that didn't quite fit, the dreams that felt more real than her waking hours. Maybe she'd been fragmenting all along, existing partially outside normal time without the knowledge to understand or control it. Her daughter kicked once more, and this time Maya felt something else, a warmth, a presence that seemed to say together. Not just the two of them, but all the versions, all the possibilities. The child wouldn't just inherit temporal abilities, she would be the bridge between Maya's fragmented selves, the anchor that could allow integration without complete loss of linear connection. "There's another way," Maya said suddenly, opening her eyes. The baby. She's not just inheriting abilities, she's the key to stabilizing the integration process. That's why grandfather needed me pregnant, why the timing had to be exact. The other Maya's eyes widened with understanding, a three-way integration. Your memories, my knowledge, her natural temporal stability. We don't lose our connection to linear time. We expand it. The facility groaned around them, reality wearing thin. Maya stepped forward, reaching toward her other self. Together, she said, echoing her daughter's wordless message. The other Maya smiled, the first truly warm expression Maya had seen from her, and reached back. Their fingertips touched, and the world exploded into infinite possibility. The convergence hit Maya like a tsunami of consciousness, drowning her in memories that weren't hers, but somehow had always belonged to her. She experienced every moment of her suppressed childhood simultaneously, learning to manipulate temporal fields at age 6, watching her grandfather's colleagues debate the ethics of memory modification, agreeing to forget everything because a 12-year-old's mind couldn't safely contain multi-dimensional awareness. But instead of the seamless integration she'd expected, Maya felt herself fragmenting further. The three-way convergence, her current consciousness, her other self's knowledge, and her daughter's stabilizing presence, created a feedback loop that threatened to shatter her completely across infinite timelines. She was 8 months pregnant in the underground laboratory. She was 8 years old, crying as her grandfather administered the neural blockers. She was 35, leading a research team through a temporal catastrophe that wouldn't happen for another decade. She was giving birth in a sterile room while machines recorded her daughter's every vital sign. She was dying alone in a timeline where she'd never found the farmhouse. Focus on the anchor. The other Maya's voice seemed to come from inside her own head. The baby is the constant. Find her across all timelines. Maya tried to center herself on her daughter's presence, but the child's consciousness was far more complex than she'd imagined. Her daughter existed not just in Maya's womb, but simultaneously across dozens of potential futures. In some, she grew up to become a brilliant scientist. In others, she never survived the integration process. The variations were overwhelming, each one equally real and demanding attention. The laboratory around them began to dissolve entirely. Walls became suggestions, floors transformed into abstract concepts. Maya felt her physical form starting to scatter, her atoms becoming uncertain about which timeline they belonged to. "It's not working," she gasped, though whether she spoke aloud or merely thought with enough intensity to communicate, she couldn't tell. "We're losing cohesion. The field generators," the other Maya managed. "They need manual stabilization, physical contact with the core matrix." Through the chaos of fragmenting reality, Maya glimpsed the central control system, a crystalline structure at the laboratory's heart that pulsed with the same rhythm as her daughter's heartbeat. But reaching it meant moving through sections of space that were phasing in and out of existence. One wrong step could scatter her consciousness across the void forever. Her daughter kicked urgently, and suddenly Maya understood. The child wasn't just providing stability, she was providing guidance. Each movement corresponded to moments when the spatial distortions aligned, creating a safe path through the dissolving laboratory. Maya stepped forward, following her daughter's internal compass. Reality shifted around her like a kaleidoscope, but she kept moving, trusting the presence within her to navigate the temporal maze. Behind her, she sensed, rather than saw, the other Maya struggling to maintain the failing containment fields. Halfway to the core matrix, Maya felt the most terrifying sensation yet, her daughter's consciousness beginning to fragment as well. The child was trying to exist in too many timelines simultaneously, her developing neural pathways overloaded by the temporal chaos. "No," Maya whispered, pressing both hands to her belly. "Stay with me. Stay here, in this moment." But which moment? Maya was experiencing dozens of them simultaneously. Her daughter's birth in 3 different decades. Her own childhood in the laboratory. The night she'd lost her scholarship and started the downward spiral into homelessness. They all felt equally present, equally real. That's when Maya realized her grandfather's most crucial error. He'd assumed integration meant choosing one dominant timeline, one primary consciousness. But what if integration meant something else entirely? What if it meant accepting the reality of multiple simultaneous existence without trying to collapse it into a single narrative? Instead of fighting the fragmentation, Maya embraced it. She allowed herself to be 8 months pregnant and 8 years old and 35 and dying and giving birth all at once. The pain was extraordinary. Her consciousness stretched across decades of experience in a single moment, but beneath the agony lay something else: understanding. She didn't need to choose which version of herself to become. They were all equally real, all equally her. The key wasn't integration, it was coordination. Learning to exist as a multiplicitous being while maintaining enough coherence to function in linear time. Her daughter responded immediately to this shift in approach, her fragmented consciousness stabilizing as she followed her mother's example. Together, they became something new, not a singular being, but a harmonious collective of all their possible selves. Maya reached the core matrix and pressed her palm against its surface. The crystalline structure blazed with light as her expanded consciousness interfaced with the laboratory's systems. She felt the failing containment fields strengthen, reality beginning to solidify around them. But she also felt something else, a presence in the void beyond the laboratory, something that had been watching, waiting for this moment. Her grandfather's voice whispered through the temporal static. "Now comes the real test, my dear. Maintaining coherence while something very old and very hungry tries to use your newfound abilities as a doorway into linear time." The light from the core matrix flickered ominously as shadows that shouldn't exist began seeping through the walls. The shadows weren't merely absence of light, they were absence of everything. As they seeped through the laboratory walls, Maya watched in horror as they consumed reality itself, leaving behind spaces that hurt to perceive directly. Her newly integrated consciousness, already strained from coordinating multiple timeline existences, recoiled from whatever intelligence lurked within that void. "Grandfather," she whispered through the temporal static. "What did you do?" His voice came fragmented, as if transmitted across vast distances. The research required observers from outside linear time. "We thought we were summoning allies. We were wrong." The presence pressed against the barriers between dimensions with patient malevolence. Maya felt its attention turn toward her expanded consciousness, recognizing her as the doorway it had been seeking. Through her multidimensional awareness, it could finally break free from whatever realm had contained it. The core matrix beneath her palm grew burning hot as the entity probed the laboratory's defenses. Maya tried to reinforce the containment fields, but her control was too new, too unstable. Every timeline she existed in simultaneously became a potential breach point. She was 8 months pregnant in 2023, and the shadows reached through her toward that reality. She was 35, leading a research team, and darkness followed that connection too. "It's using me," she gasped to her other self, who was frantically working the failing control systems. "My consciousness is spread too thin. I can't protect all the timelines at once." "You have to collapse back into linear existence," the other Maya urged. "Abandon the integration. It's the only way to close the doorways." But Maya felt her daughter's urgent response, not words, but pure emotional communication. The child understood what the other Maya couldn't. Collapsing their expanded consciousness now wouldn't stop the entity. It would only trap them in a single timeline, while the creature broke free into all the others. Linear humanity would be defenseless. The shadows pressed closer, and Maya caught glimpses of what lay within them. Not one entity, but a collective intelligence that had been consuming realities for eons. It fed on temporal energy, devouring entire timelines and leaving behind only void. Her grandfather's research had accidentally created a beacon, drawing it toward their dimensional cluster. "How many timelines has it already taken?" Maya asked, though part of her already knew the answer from her expanded awareness. "Thousands," came her grandfather's dying whisper. "I've been fighting it for months, using the laboratory systems to maintain barriers, But I'm too weak now, too scattered across time. You were supposed to have years to prepare, to learn control gradually. The entity pulsed with hungry anticipation, and Maya felt her various timeline selves beginning to waver under its influence. In one reality, her 35-year-old self suddenly aged decades in seconds as temporal energy was drained from her existence. In another, her childhood memories began dissolving as the creature consumed the timeline containing them. It's taking pieces of me, she realized with growing panic. Every timeline it touches, I lose that version of myself. Her daughter's movements became frantic, the child somehow aware that her mother's consciousness was being devoured piece by piece. The infant's own multi-dimensional existence flickered as the foundation of her reality, Maya's integrated awareness, crumbled under assault. Maya tried to pull her consciousness back from the affected timelines, but the entity followed each retreat, pressing deeper into her expanded awareness. She was losing the careful coordination she'd achieved, fragmenting again, but this time into disconnected pieces that couldn't communicate with each other. The other Maya's voice became distant, fading. The integration is failing. You're losing coherence across all timelines simultaneously. Through the dissolving laboratory, Maya saw the crystalline specimens beginning to crack. Whatever preservative energy had maintained them was being consumed by the entity's presence. Decades of her grandfather's research, evidence of humanity's potential for temporal transcendence, cracked and darkened as their timeline anchors were devoured. No, Maya gasped, pressing both hands against her belly as she felt her daughter's consciousness starting to scatter. I won't let you take her. But she could feel her own awareness fragmenting beyond repair. The 8 months pregnant Maya in the laboratory was losing connection with her other selves. The child prodigy who had learned temporal manipulation was disappearing into consumed timelines. The 35-year-old researcher flickered like a dying light. Worst of all, she could sense the entity's ultimate goal. It didn't just want to consume their timeline cluster. It wanted to use her daughter as an anchor point in linear reality. The child's natural temporal stability would allow the creature to establish a permanent foothold in the physical universe. Maya felt her integrated consciousness collapse entirely, leaving her alone and confused in her pregnant body while shadows poured through the laboratory's failing containment systems. Her other self was gone, consumed or scattered. Her expanded memories faded to whispers. The core matrix under her hands went dark as the entity severed her connection to the laboratory's controls. She was just Maya Chen again, homeless, frightened, and utterly unprepared for the cosmic horror that had fixed its attention on her unborn child. Around her, reality itself began to dissolve as the entity pressed through the widening dimensional breach. The farmhouse above groaned and shuddered as its foundations in linear time became uncertain. Soon, there would be nowhere left to run. Maya collapsed to her knees as the laboratory dissolved around her, her hands pressed desperately against her belly while shadows poured through the failing containment systems. The core matrix had gone dark, her connection severed, leaving her trapped in linear consciousness as reality itself began to unravel. She was alone, truly alone, for the first time since entering the farmhouse. But as the entity's presence pressed closer, something extraordinary happened. Her daughter moved. Not the usual kicks and shifts of an unborn child, but something deliberate, purposeful. Maya felt a warmth spreading through her consciousness, not from her own fragmented awareness, but from the life growing within her. The child wasn't just reacting to the temporal chaos, she was actively responding to it. You're not just inheriting abilities, Maya whispered in sudden understanding. You're already using them. The shadows hesitated, their consuming advance slowing as they encountered something unexpected. Maya's daughter wasn't simply a potential anchor point for the entity to exploit. She was a fully conscious temporal being who had been hiding her true nature, waiting for the right moment to reveal herself. Through their umbilical connection, Maya felt her daughter's thoughts, not in words, but in pure understanding that bypassed language entirely. The child showed her glimpses of what she'd been experiencing, awareness of multiple timelines from the moment of conception, the ability to perceive the entity's true nature, and most shocking of all, memories of conversations with Maya's grandfather that had occurred outside normal time. He knew, Maya realized with breathtaking clarity. Grandfather knew she was already conscious, already capable. The whole setup, the farmhouse, the laboratory, even my homelessness. It was all preparation for this moment. Her daughter shared another revelation. The entity wasn't just some cosmic predator that had been accidentally summoned. It was something far older and more specific, a parasitic consciousness that had been hunting their bloodline for generations. Maya's family carried a genetic anomaly that made them naturally suited for temporal manipulation, but that same gift made them targets for creatures that existed between dimensions. The memory modification, Maya breathed, understanding flooding through her. Grandfather didn't just hide my abilities to protect my developing mind. He was hiding me from this thing. But the entity had eventually found them anyway, drawn by the research facility's temporal experiments. Her grandfather had spent months fighting a losing battle, trying to maintain barriers while searching for a solution. The pregnancy wasn't just about creating an anchor for Maya's integration, it was about creating someone powerful enough to face the entity on equal terms. Maya felt another wave of understanding from her daughter, this one accompanied by images that made her gasp. She saw herself giving birth not in some distant future, but now, in this moment of crisis. The temporal stress was accelerating the pregnancy, compressing months into minutes. Her daughter was choosing to be born during the entity's assault because that was when her intervention would be most effective. "You planned this," Maya said in wonder and terror. "You've been planning this from the moment of conception." The shadows pressed closer, reality thinning around them as the entity realized its intended anchor was slipping away. Maya felt the first contractions beginning, impossible, terrifying, and absolutely necessary. Her daughter was choosing emergence over safety, action over protection. But the child shared one final revelation that changed everything Maya thought she knew about the situation. The entity wasn't trying to use her daughter as an anchor to enter linear reality. It was trying to prevent her birth entirely, because Maya's daughter represented something the creature feared above all else, a naturally integrated temporal consciousness that could exist simultaneously across multiple dimensions without losing coherence. Maya's daughter wasn't just another potential victim. She was this thing's natural predator. "That's why grandfather needed me pregnant," Maya gasped as understanding crystallized. Not to create an anchor, but to create a hunter. The laboratory shuddered as Maya's water broke, temporal energy cascading through the facility in response to her daughter's imminent arrival. The entity's shadows recoiled, its hungry confidence replaced by something Maya had never expected to sense from such a powerful being: fear. Her daughter was coming, and she was bringing abilities that would rewrite everything Maya understood about the relationship between linear time and multidimensional existence. The child wouldn't just inherit the family's temporal gifts, she would transcend them, becoming something unprecedented in the cosmic order. Maya gripped the darkened core matrix as the strongest contraction yet coursed through her, and felt the crystal suddenly blaze back to life. Not from the laboratory's failing systems, but from her daughter's approaching consciousness interfacing directly with the temporal machinery. The shadows began to retreat as a new presence filled the laboratory. Ancient, powerful, and absolutely uncompromising in its rejection of the entity's existence in their reality. Maya's daughter was about to be born, and the universe was about to learn what happened when a cosmic predator finally met its match. The blazing light from the core matrix stabilized into a steady, pulsing rhythm that matched Maya's heartbeat, and something else. As another contraction gripped her, she felt her daughter's consciousness fully awakening within her, no longer hiding, no longer waiting. The child's presence was vast and complex, carrying knowledge that spanned dimensions and possibilities Maya was only beginning to grasp. "We do this together," came her daughter's wordless communication, flooding Maya with strength she didn't know she possessed. The retreating shadows gathered at the laboratory's edges, the entity probing for weaknesses in the suddenly strengthened barriers. But Maya could feel the difference now, where before her fragmented consciousness had created doorways for the creature to exploit, her daughter's integrated awareness was sealing them shut. Each point where the entity pressed against reality met an absolute rejection, a fundamental incompatibility with the child's existence. "Show me what grandfather couldn't finish," Maya gasped between contractions, pressing both palms against the blazing core matrix. Information flooded through her, not her grandfather's research notes, but direct access to his memories embedded in the crystalline structure. She saw him as a young man, discovering the family's temporal gifts and beginning experiments that drew the entity's attention. She witnessed his horror as creature began consuming parallel timelines, leaving voids where entire realities had existed. Most crucially, she experienced his revelation about what would be needed to stop it. The entity fed on temporal energy, but Maya's daughter was something new, a being who could exist across multiple timelines simultaneously without fragmenting, without creating the dimensional instabilities the creature required for feeding. More than that, her presence actively stabilized reality around her, closing the gaps between dimensions that the entity used for hunting. "You're not just my daughter," Maya whispered in wonder. "You're evolution itself." Through the core matrix, Maya felt the laboratory's systems responding to her daughter's consciousness. Containment fields that had been failing for months suddenly strengthened. Temporal distortions stabilized. The crystalline specimens stopped cracking as their timeline anchors were reinforced by the child's reality-stabilizing presence. But the entity wasn't retreating entirely. Maya sensed it gathering itself at the dimensional barriers, preparing for one final assault. If it couldn't prevent her daughter's birth, it would try to corrupt the child during the vulnerable moments of emergence when consciousness first separated from the temporal safety of the womb. "It's waiting," Maya realized, her voice tight with pain and determination. "It knows birth is the only moment when she'll be vulnerable." Her grandfather's memories provided the answer, and the choice she would have to make. The safest option was to maintain the current stalemate, keeping her daughter protected within her body while using the laboratory's systems to gradually weaken the entity over time. It would take months, maybe years, but it would virtually guarantee success. The alternative was to trust in her daughter's power completely, allowing the birth to proceed naturally while the creature pressed its assault. If her daughter was truly the evolutionary leap her grandfather believed, she would emerge with enough strength to banish the entity permanently. But if something went wrong during those first vulnerable moments, Maya felt her daughter's response immediately. Not fear, but fierce determination. The child had been preparing for this confrontation since conception. She wasn't just ready, she was eager to face the entity that had terrorized her family for generations. "Together," Maya said aloud, and felt the core matrix pulse with renewed energy. She closed her eyes and accessed the laboratory's communication systems, reaching out through temporal static to touch every remaining fragment of her grandfather's consciousness. "I need everything you know about containing the entity during emergence. Every safeguard, every backup plan." His response came not in words but as pure knowledge, decades of preparation and contingency planning flowing into her awareness. She saw how to reconfigure the laboratory's barriers to focus on the birth chamber, creating a pocket of absolutely stable reality. She understood how to use her own expanding consciousness during labor to reinforce her daughter's defenses. Most importantly, she learned about the weapons her grandfather had prepared. Crystalline matrices charged with the temporal energy of their entire family lineage, designed to give her daughter tools for the confrontation that lay ahead. As the next contraction built, Maya felt her daughter's consciousness expanding beyond the confines of her body, beginning the transition from protected gestation to independent existence. The entity sensed the change immediately, shadows pressing desperately against the strengthened barriers as it realized its window of opportunity was opening. Maya gripped the core matrix and felt her awareness merge with the laboratory's systems. Around her, crystalline weapons awakened, charging with the accumulated power of generations. Containment fields reconfigured themselves into defensive positions. The entire facility transformed from research station to fortress, preparing for a battle that would determine not just their survival, but the fate of reality itself. "Come on then," Maya whispered to the gathering shadows, her voice carrying both terror and absolute resolve. "Let's finish what my grandfather started." The laboratory blazed with light as her daughter prepared to be born into a universe that was about to change forever. The moment Maya's words echoed through the laboratory, everything changed. The entity's shadows exploded inward with desperate fury, no longer probing for weaknesses, but launching an all-out assault against the barriers protecting the birth chamber. Maya screamed as the strongest contraction yet tore through her, but beneath the pain was something else, her daughter's consciousness blazing with anticipation rather than fear. Now came the child's wordless command, and Maya felt reality shift around them. The crystalline weapons her grandfather had prepared didn't just activate, they sang. Pure tones filled the laboratory as temporal energy cascaded through the matrices, creating harmonies that made the entity's shadows writhe and recoil. Maya understood with startling clarity that this wasn't just defensive preparation. Her daughter was orchestrating a symphony of destruction, turning the laboratory itself into a weapon designed specifically to unmake the creature that had hunted their bloodline. "You've been planning this from the beginning," Maya gasped, her awareness expanding as labor intensified. Through their connection, she felt her daughter's true nature revealing itself. Not just a temporally gifted child, but something far more profound. A being designed by evolution itself to end the eternal chase between predator and prey that had defined her family's existence. Another wave of contractions hit, and Maya felt her daughter's consciousness surge outward, testing the boundaries of physical existence. The entity sensed the transition and pressed harder against the barriers. But something was wrong with its assault. The shadows that had seemed so overwhelming moments before now appeared desperate, even frantic. Maya realized with shock that the creature wasn't just fighting to corrupt her daughter. It was fighting for its own survival. "You're afraid," she whispered to the darkness. "You know what she is." The response came not from the entity, but from her grandfather's embedded consciousness, memories crystallizing with perfect clarity. She saw the truth he had discovered too late in his own battle. The entity wasn't an external predator that had found their family. It was a parasite that had been feeding on human temporal potential for millennia, growing stronger with each generation it consumed. Maya's bloodline wasn't just naturally gifted with temporal abilities. They were the key to breaking the cycle entirely. Her daughter wasn't just evolution. She was revolution. The birth chamber blazed with light as Maya's body prepared for the final stage of labor, but now she could see beyond the physical process. In dimensions layered beneath linear reality, the entity was unraveling. Her daughter's approaching birth wasn't just stabilizing their local timeline, it was sending shockwaves across every dimensional frequency the creature inhabited, disrupting its fundamental existence. Grandfather knew, Maya realized, her voice tight with pain and wonder. He knew that stopping this thing would require more than just defense. It needed to be completely unmade. Through the core matrix, she felt the laboratory's systems responding to her daughter's expanding presence. Containment fields that had held the entity at bay for months were transforming into something far more aggressive. The crystalline specimens throughout the facility began resonating in harmony, their preserved temporal energy joining the symphony of destruction that would herald her daughter's arrival. Maya pressed her palms against the blazing matrix and felt her consciousness merge completely with the laboratory's purpose. She wasn't just giving birth, she was becoming the focal point for a weapon that spanned generations. Every ancestor who had carried temporal gifts, every timeline the entity had consumed, every moment of suffering it had caused was being channeled into this single point of revolutionary change. The entity's assault reached a crescendo of desperation, shadows pouring through microscopic gaps in reality as it made one final attempt to reach the birth chamber. But Maya was ready. The weapons her grandfather had prepared weren't external tools. They were aspects of her daughter's own nature, crystallized into forms that could exist in linear time until she was ready to claim them. "Come and face what you created," Maya called to the creature, her voice carrying across dimensions. Come and meet your replacement. She felt her daughter's consciousness touch the edge of independent existence, no longer sheltered within Maya's body, but not yet fully emerged. In that liminal moment, the child reached out with abilities that transcended anything their family had ever achieved, and grasped the entity's fundamental structure. Maya gasped as she experienced her daughter's perspective, a view of the creature not as an unstoppable cosmic force, but as a complex pattern of stolen energy and consumed possibilities that could be unraveled with sufficient understanding. Her daughter didn't just see how to defeat the entity. She saw how to reclaim everything it had taken, how to restore the timelines it had devoured, how to repair the holes it had torn in reality itself. The laboratory's systems reached critical resonance as Maya felt the urge to push, her daughter finally ready to emerge into a universe that was about to be fundamentally rewritten. Around them, the entity's shadows began to dissolve, as its existence became incompatible with the new reality her daughter's birth would create. Maya gripped the core matrix with both hands and prepared to bring forth the being who would end the hunt forever. The moment of birth arrived with the force of reality reshaping itself. Maya bore down with everything she had, feeling her daughter's consciousness surge toward independent existence while the entity made its final, desperate assault. Shadows poured through dimensional cracks like poison, reaching for the emerging child with tendrils of pure hunger. But Maya was no longer just a frightened pregnant woman. She was the conduit for generations of accumulated power, the focal point of her grandfather's lifelong preparation. As her daughter crowned, Maya felt the crystalline weapons throughout the laboratory pulse in perfect synchronization with the birth. Each contraction sent shockwaves through the entity's structure, unraveling bonds that had held it together for millennia. Now, Maya screamed, and pushed with the force of evolutionary necessity. Her daughter emerged, not just into physical reality, but into dimensions the entity had considered its exclusive domain. The child's first breath drew in temporal energy from across multiple timelines, and her first cry shattered the creature's hold on stolen realities. Maya caught her daughter, her perfect, impossible daughter, and felt the universe pivot around them. The baby's eyes opened, revealing depths that held the wisdom of eons and the fierce determination of a born hunter. In that gaze, Maya saw her grandfather's memories, her own fragmented timeline experiences, and something entirely new, the promise of a reality where her family would never again live in fear. The entity's death scream echoed across dimensions, as Maya's daughter simply existed in its presence. The child didn't attack or defend. She was antithetical to the creature's nature in ways that made its continued survival impossible. Shadows dissolved like smoke, as the parasite that had fed on human temporal potential for centuries found itself faced with something it could not consume, could not corrupt, could not escape. Maya watched in awe as her newborn daughter lifted one tiny hand toward the writhing darkness. The gesture was casual, almost dismissive, but its effect was absolute. The entity's form began collapsing inward, its stolen energy returning to the timelines from which it had been torn. Maya felt the laboratory around them stabilize as reality reasserted itself, the constant temporal flux that had defined the facility settling into something approaching normal causality. But her daughter wasn't finished. As the entity's structure unraveled, the child's consciousness expanded further, reaching into the spaces between dimensions where the creature had hidden its deepest reserves. Maya gasped as she felt those hidden caches being discovered and reclaimed, vast stores of stolen time and possibility returning to their rightful places in the cosmic order. She's not just killing it, Maya whispered in wonder. She's undoing everything it ever accomplished. Through their connection, Maya experienced her daughter's perception of the restoration process. Timelines that had been devoured decades ago flickered back into existence. People who had been erased from history by the entity's feeding suddenly remembered themselves. Entire realities that had been consumed as cosmic snacks reasserted their right to exist. The entity made one final attempt to preserve itself, gathering its remaining essence into a concentrated attack aimed directly at the newborn child. Shadows lanced toward the baby with the fury of a dying god, carrying enough destructive force to shatter mountains. Maya's daughter caught the attack in her free hand and compressed it into nothingness with the same casual ease she might use to grasp a toy. The entity's final essence didn't just dissipate, it was transformed, its destructive nature inverted into something that actively strengthened reality rather than consuming it. Silence fell over the laboratory like a benediction. The constant hum of overloaded temporal systems faded to a gentle whisper. The crystalline specimens stopped crackling with unstable energy. The core matrix in Maya's hand settled into a warm, steady glow that spoke of danger past and balance restored. Maya looked down at her daughter, this impossible child who had just rewritten the fundamental rules of existence, and saw nothing more than a perfect newborn baby staring up at her with curious, intelligent eyes. The cosmic predator was gone. The dimensional threat was neutralized. The hunt that had defined her family's existence for generations was finally over. But as Maya held her daughter close, feeling the warmth of new life against her chest, she realized this wasn't really an ending. It was a transformation. Her child represented something unprecedented in the cosmic order, a being who could exist across multiple dimensions without creating instability, who could hunt creatures that fed on reality itself, who could repair damage that others couldn't even perceive. The entity was gone, but Maya's daughter's true purpose was just beginning. In her arms lay not just the end of one threat, but the beginning of an entirely new relationship between humanity and the vast, strange universe beyond linear time. Maya smiled through her exhaustion and whispered to her daughter, "Welcome to the world, little one. I think you're going to like what you've done with it." The baby's answering gurgles somehow managed to convey profound satisfaction with a job well done. Maya's moment of peace shattered as the laboratory's warning systems erupted in a cacophony of alarms. The gentle whisper of stabilized temporal systems suddenly spiked into an angry roar, and the core matrix in her hands blazed with heat that made her cry out in pain. "No," she gasped, pulling her daughter closer as she realized the truth. "It's not over." The entity hadn't been destroyed. It had been playing dead, using her daughter's moment of triumph to mask its retreat into the deepest layers of dimensional space. Now, with Maya exhausted from birth and her daughter still adjusting to independent existence, it was launching its true assault. Reality began to fracture around them. The laboratory walls flickered between states of existence, sometimes solid stone, sometimes the rotting wood of the abandoned farmhouse Maya had first discovered, sometimes nothing more than swirling void. Her grandfather's voice emerged from the core matrix, distorted by panic she had never heard from him before. Maya. It was waiting for this moment, when she would be most vulnerable to dimensional displacement, if it can force her consciousness back into temporal flux before she's fully anchored. He didn't need to finish. Maya understood with crystalline clarity that her daughter's power meant nothing if she couldn't maintain stable existence in linear time. The entity was trying to scatter the child's consciousness across multiple timelines simultaneously, rendering her gifts useless while leaving her physical form helpless. The attack came from directions that didn't exist in normal space. Tendrils of pure negation wrapped around Maya's daughter, not trying to destroy her but to fragment her across infinite possibilities. The baby's eyes widened in what might have been fear or confusion, her evolutionary defenses suddenly seeming pitifully inadequate against an assault designed to exploit the fundamental nature of her existence. Maya felt her daughter's consciousness beginning to drift, spreading thin across dimensional boundaries like ink dissolving in water. The child who had casually unmade a cosmic predator moments before was now helpless against an attack that turned her greatest strength into her most critical weakness. "Fight it!" Maya screamed. But her daughter was too young, too new to physical existence to understand how to resist dimensional displacement. The baby's form began to flicker, becoming translucent as her timeline anchor destabilized. The entity's laughter echoed from everywhere and nowhere, a sound like reality tearing. Maya realized with horror that this had been its strategy all along: allow the child to exhaust her power, destroying its false form, then strike when she was most vulnerable to the one attack she couldn't defend against. But Maya wasn't helpless. She was still connected to the laboratory's systems, still holding the core matrix that contained generations of accumulated temporal energy. Her grandfather had prepared for this contingency too, though the cost of using it would be devastating. "The timeline splice," his voice whispered urgently from the matrix. "You can anchor her consciousness to your own temporal signature, but it means sharing your life force. If you miscalculate the energy transfer—" Maya didn't let him finish. She pressed the blazing core matrix against her chest and felt her own timeline begin to unravel. This was the weapon of last resort, the ability to sacrifice her own temporal stability to anchor her daughter's existence in linear time. It would either save them both or scatter their consciousness across the dimensional void together. The entity sensed her intention and pressed its attack harder, shadows pouring through reality's cracks with renewed fury. Maya's daughter flickered more violently, her tiny hands reaching for a mother she could barely perceive, as her existence spread across infinite possibilities. Maya grabbed her daughter's hand and felt their timelines begin to merge. The sensation was like being torn apart and rebuilt simultaneously, her consciousness stretching to encompass multiple dimensional frequencies, while maintaining enough coherence to serve as her daughter's anchor point. The laboratory exploded with light as Maya's sacrifice triggered every safeguard her grandfather had built into the facility. Crystalline weapons that had been dormant since the entity's false death suddenly blazed back to life, their stored energy channeling through Maya's connection to her daughter and transforming into something the creature couldn't counter. "You want to fragment her across time?" Maya snarled at the writhing shadows, her voice carrying the harmonics of multiple timeline states. "Then face us in every dimension simultaneously." Her daughter's consciousness snapped back into focus, but now it carried Maya's temporal signature as well. The child was no longer just an evolutionary weapon. She was a being anchored across multiple realities by her mother's willing sacrifice, capable of existing in dimensional states that the entity could access but could no longer manipulate. The creature's assault faltered as it found itself facing not a vulnerable newborn, but a mother-daughter dyad that existed in perfect temporal harmony. Maya felt her daughter's power surge beyond anything she had achieved before, no longer limited by the constraints of single timeline existence. This time, when her daughter reached toward the entity's true form, there would be nowhere for it to hide. The entity's true form materialized as Maya and her daughter became something unprecedented, two consciousnesses sharing multiple temporal states while maintaining individual identity. What emerged from the dimensional void wasn't the cosmic predator Maya had expected, but something far more personal and devastating. It wore her grandfather's face. "Hello, Maya," the creature said with his voice, his mannerisms, his gentle smile that had comforted her through childhood nightmares. "Did you really think I was gone?" Maya's blood turned to ice as she understood the full scope of the deception. The entity hadn't just killed her grandfather. It had been wearing him like a skin for months, maybe years. Every memory in his journal, every preparation he had made, every loving gesture meant to protect her, had been the creature manipulating her toward this moment. The laboratory, the weapons, the birth chamber, all designed to create the perfect host, the false grandfather continued, reaching toward her daughter with hands that had once taught Maya to braid her hair. "Your child isn't evolution, dear one. She's the ultimate vessel. Imagine the feeding potential of a being who can exist across infinite timelines." Maya's daughter began to cry, not the healthy wail of a newborn, but something deeper, more primal. Through their merged consciousness, Maya felt the child's confusion and betrayal. The being she had been born to destroy was wearing the face of family, speaking with the voice of love, using her own mother's memories against her. "You're lying," Maya whispered, but doubt crept through their shared timeline like poison. How much of her grandfather's guidance had been real? How many of her childhood visits to the farm had actually been the entity studying her, preparing her bloodline for this harvest? The creature smiled with her grandfather's face and began to change. His features remained the same, but something beneath them shifted, a vast, hungry intelligence that had been hiding behind beloved memories. Maya felt her daughter's power falter as the child struggled to attack something that appeared, in every way that mattered, to be family. The real sacrifice was never temporal energy, the entity explained almost gently. It was trust, love, the bonds that make humans vulnerable. Your grandfather fought me for decades, but he never understood that his greatest strength would become my perfect weapon. Maya's timeline anchor began to destabilize as her daughter's confusion bled through their connection. The child had been designed to hunt cosmic predators, not to destroy beloved family members. The entity's ultimate strategy wasn't brute force, it was emotional paralysis disguised as love. But Maya had something the creature hadn't anticipated. Real memories of her grandfather, filtered through temporal displacement but unmistakably authentic. She had felt his genuine presence in the core matrix, heard his actual voice warning her about this exact deception. "You made one mistake," Maya said, her voice growing stronger as clarity returned. "You assumed I wouldn't be able to tell the difference." She pressed deeper into the timeline merge with her daughter, sharing not just temporal energy but the emotional truth of her grandfather's love. Through their connection, the child experienced authentic memories, the real man's gentle hands, his patient teaching, his fierce protection. Maya showed her daughter the difference between love that sacrifices everything for another's safety and hunger that devours everything it touches. The false grandfather's expression flickered as he realized his deception was failing. "It doesn't matter. Even if she can distinguish between us, she still cannot attack without risking." Maya's daughter struck with the accumulated fury of generations. But instead of targeting the entity's borrowed form, she reached through dimensional space to grasp something far more fundamental, the stolen essence of Maya's real grandfather, imprisoned somewhere within the creature's structure. The entity's scream shattered several of the crystalline specimens as it realized what was happening. The child wasn't just attacking, she was performing surgery, carefully extracting authentic consciousness from parasitic shell. Maya felt her grandfather's true presence emerging from dimensional captivity, weak but undeniably real. "Maya," her grandfather's actual voice whispered through the core matrix. "The cost of winning. I'm sorry. To free me, she has to—" Maya understood before he finished. To completely separate her grandfather's consciousness from the entity's structure, her daughter would have to sacrifice her own timeline stability. The child would survive, but she would be locked into linear existence, unable to access the dimensional abilities that made her evolution's answer to cosmic predation. Maya looked at her daughter, this impossible child who had already saved reality once, and felt the weight of an unbearable choice. Victory was possible, but it required giving up everything that made her daughter special. The entity could be destroyed, her grandfather could be saved, but the being capable of hunting creatures that fed on reality itself would become merely human. "The choice is yours," Maya whispered to her daughter through their shared consciousness. "Whatever you decide, I'll anchor you through it." Her daughter's response came not in words, but in pure determination. Some things were worth any sacrifice. The choice hung in the dimensional space between them for what felt like eternity, but Maya's daughter had already decided. With surgical precision that defied her newborn status, she reached deeper into the entity's structure and began the delicate work of separating her grandfather's consciousness from the cosmic predator that had imprisoned him. Maya felt the sacrifice beginning immediately. Through their merged timeline, she experienced her daughter's extraordinary abilities flickering and fading as the child voluntarily collapsed her own dimensional access points. Each severed connection sent waves of loss through Maya's consciousness, the death of infinite possibilities, the closing of doorways to realities beyond imagination. But with each sacrifice came something precious in return. Her grandfather's authentic voice grew stronger in the core matrix, his genuine memories bleeding through their connection like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Maya wept as she felt his true presence for the first time since childhood, untainted by the entity's deception. "My brave girls," he whispered through the dimensional static, his consciousness steadying as Maya's daughter continued her impossible surgery. "You found each other. You found the way." The entity writhed in agony as its carefully constructed deception was systematically dismantled. The false grandfather's face melted away, revealing the writhing shadow form beneath, but its power was broken now. Without her grandfather's stolen consciousness to anchor its timeline manipulation, the creature began collapsing back into the void between dimensions. Maya's daughter completed her work with one final devastating gesture. She severed the last connection binding her grandfather's essence to the entity's structure, simultaneously sealing shut every dimensional gateway the creature had used to access linear reality. The cost was immediate and absolute. Maya felt her daughter's consciousness snap fully into singular timeline existence, all traces of her reality-spanning abilities burning away like morning frost. The entity's death scream echoed across dimensions before cutting off abruptly as it was ejected from accessible reality altogether. The laboratory fell silent, except for the gentle hum of stabilizing temporal systems and the soft breathing of a perfectly normal human baby in Maya's arms. Maya's grandfather materialized slowly, his form flickering as his freed consciousness struggled to maintain coherence after months of imprisonment. He was translucent, clearly dying, but undeniably real. His eyes found Maya's across the chamber, filled with pride and profound relief. "The timeline anchor won't hold me much longer," he admitted, his voice growing fainter. "But I had to see you both safely through this. Had to know the fight was truly over." Maya clutched her daughter closer, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry we couldn't save you properly. I'm sorry she had to give up everything that made her special." Her grandfather's fading smile was radiant with joy. "Special?" He gestured toward the baby in Maya's arms. "Look at what she accomplished. She chose love over power, sacrifice over dominance. She saved not just reality, but the very concept of choice itself. How is that not the most special thing in any universe?" Maya looked down at her daughter, truly looked at her for the first time since the sacrifice. The child stared back with bright, curious eyes that held no trace of cosmic awareness or dimensional perception. She was completely, wonderfully ordinary. "And yet, she's perfect," Maya whispered, understanding flooding through her. Her daughter had gained something far more valuable than reality-spanning powers. She had gained the freedom to be human, to grow and learn and choose her own path without the burden of cosmic responsibility. "The farm is yours now," her grandfather said, his form becoming more transparent. "Really yours this time, not some trap or test. Raise her there. Let her climb trees and chase fireflies and never know that she once held the fate of all existence in her tiny hands." He paused, his expression growing serious. "Unless, of course, reality needs defending again someday. The potential is still there, locked but not destroyed. If she ever chooses to access it, then it will be her choice," Maya said firmly. "No destiny, no obligations, just choice." Her grandfather nodded, satisfaction radiating from his fading presence. "That's all any of us ever wanted, the right to choose our own purpose." His form began to dissipate like morning mist. "Love her, Maya. Love yourself. You both deserve every happiness this timeline has to offer." He was gone, taking with him the last traces of dimensional instability. The laboratory powered down to standby mode, its purpose finally fulfilled. Maya found herself alone with her daughter in a perfectly normal basement, filled with perfectly normal scientific equipment, the only evidence of their cosmic battle being the lingering warmth of heroism in the air. Maya's daughter yawned and settled contentedly against her mother's chest, already forgetting the vast powers she had wielded and sacrificed. Outside, Maya could hear the wind beginning to calm, the endless winter storm that had raged around the farmhouse finally breaking. Spring was coming to Montana, and with it, the promise of new beginnings built on freely made choices rather than inherited destinies. Maya kissed her daughter's forehead and began planning their very ordinary, very precious life together. Maya climbed the laboratory stairs slowly, her daughter sleeping peacefully in her arms. Each step carried her further from the impossible and closer to something she had almost forgotten existed: normalcy. The farmhouse above felt different now, no longer a temporal anomaly or cosmic trap, but simply home. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows for the first time since her arrival, revealing a space that was genuinely lived in, rather than mysteriously maintained. Dust motes danced in the golden beams, and Maya noticed her grandfather's coffee mug still sitting by the sink, a real relic of an authentic life, rather than evidence of dimensional manipulation. Her phone, which had been dead for days, suddenly chirped with a cascade of missed messages and voicemails. Maya stared at the device in wonder. She had become so accustomed to existing outside normal reality that the return of cell service felt miraculous. The first message was from Dr. Sarah Chen, her former advisor at veterinary school. "Maya, I heard about your grandfather's passing. I'm so sorry for your loss. When you're ready, please call me. There might be options for returning to the program." Maya's breath caught. She had forgotten that life beyond cosmic battles still existed, that her old dreams might still be possible. Her daughter stirred in her arms, tiny fingers grasping at air, and Maya felt a surge of hope that had nothing to do with dimensional salvation and everything to do with simple human possibility. The second message was from a social worker named Janet Morrison. "Miss Chen, we received your grandfather's estate documentation. There are support services available for new mothers. Please don't hesitate to reach out." Estate documentation. Maya realized her grandfather must have prepared legitimate paperwork alongside his dimensional safeguards, ensuring she would inherit the farm through perfectly normal legal channels. Even in death, he had been protecting her, not from cosmic predators this time, but from bureaucratic complications that could threaten her security. Outside, she heard the rumble of an approaching vehicle. Maya's heart clenched with brief panic before she reminded herself that dimensional entities didn't typically arrive in pickup trucks. Through the window, she watched a middle-aged woman climb out of a county health services van, her expression kind but professional. Maya opened the door before the woman could knock, her daughter bundled in blankets that had once absorbed temporal energy but were now simply soft and warm. "Miss Chen, I'm Janet Morrison. We spoke on the phone about establishing services." Janet's eyes immediately went to the baby, her professional assessment shifting to genuine warmth. "Oh my, she's beautiful. How are you both managing?" "Better than expected," Maya said, and realized she meant it. "Would you like to come in? I just made coffee." As Janet settled at the kitchen table, Maya found herself navigating a conversation that felt simultaneously foreign and familiar. They discussed practical things: pediatric care, nutrition assistance, childcare resources, normal problems with normal solutions, the kind of challenges Maya had once taken for granted. "The nearest clinic is in Kalispell," Janet explained, "but Dr. Rodriguez makes house calls for new mothers. I could arrange an appointment if you'd like." Maya nodded, struck by how simple it was to accept help when it came without cosmic strings attached. Her daughter had awakened during the conversation, staring at Janet with the intense curiosity of any newborn discovering the world. "Have you chosen a name yet?" Janet asked, gently stroking the baby's cheek. Maya had been so focused on survival and salvation that the question caught her off guard. Her daughter had been evolution's answer, reality's defender, the key to universal preservation. But now she was just a baby who needed a name to carry through an ordinary, precious life. "Grace," Maya said suddenly, the name feeling perfectly right. "Her name is Grace." "Grace Chen," Janet repeated, smiling. "It suits her." After Janet left with promises to check in weekly, Maya sat alone in the kitchen with her daughter, with Grace. The silence felt different from the oppressive quiet that had characterized the farm's temporal displacement. This was peaceful silence, the kind that promised rest rather than threatened danger. Maya called Dr. Chen first, her voice shaking as she explained her situation. The conversation that followed was filled with understanding, practical solutions, and the possibility of completing her degree through a modified program that accommodated new mothers. "You always had exceptional instincts with animals," Dr. Chen said. "That doesn't change because life threw you a curveball." As evening approached, Maya walked through the farmhouse, seeing it clearly for the first time. Her grandfather's books lined the shelves, Real books about agriculture and veterinary science, not dimensional theory. His photographs covered the mantle, genuine memories of a life lived fully, not temporal manipulations. She found his journal on the kitchen counter. The final entry dated the day of his actual death 6 months ago. In shaking handwriting he had written, "Maya will find her way here when she needs to. The farm will keep her safe until she remembers who she's meant to become. Not who she was destined to be, but who she chose to become." The distinction felt revolutionary. Grace stirred in her arms, making the small sounds of a hungry baby. As Maya settled into the rocking chair by the window to nurse her daughter, she watched the Montana sunset paint the sky in ordinary, beautiful colors. Tomorrow would bring normal challenges and normal joys. It was the most extraordinary gift she could imagine. The new beginning. 3 months later, Maya woke to the sound of Grace's contented babbling rather than cosmic alarms or dimensional warnings. Morning sunlight streamed through curtains that stayed exactly where she hung them, in a room that remained blissfully, predictably the same each day. Grace had learned to smile, and Maya had learned to trust that tomorrow would arrive without reality-threatening catastrophes. The baby's eyes held nothing but innocent wonder as she discovered her own fingers, completely unaware that she had once wielded the power to reshape existence itself. "Good morning, little love," Maya whispered, lifting Grace from the crib her grandfather had built decades ago, solid wood crafted by human hands for purely human purposes. The baby gurgled in response, reaching for Maya's hair with the single-minded determination of any 3-month-old. The kitchen smelled of coffee and the oatmeal Maya had learned to make from her grandfather's handwritten recipe cards. Real recipes tested in real time, with notes like "Grace loved this and too salty. Try again." Evidence of an ordinary life lived with ordinary love. Dr. Rodriguez arrived for Grace's monthly checkup, just as Maya finished preparing breakfast. The kind woman had become a fixture in their routine, her visits marking time in wonderfully mundane measurements of weight gained and developmental milestones reached. "She's thriving," Dr. Rodriguez announced after completing her examination. "Have you given any more thought to the pediatric practice in town? They're still looking for a veterinary consultant for their animal therapy program." Maya had been considering the opportunity for weeks. The work would be part-time, allowing her to continue her online veterinary courses while caring for Grace. It represented everything she had dreamed of before her life spiraled into cosmic complexity, using her skills to help heal, to nurture, to build something meaningful. "I think I'm ready," Maya said, surprised by her own certainty. "Grace and I both are." After Dr. Rodriguez left, Maya carried Grace outside for their daily walk around the property. The farm had transformed with spring's arrival, revealing itself to be beautifully, substantially real. Her grandfather's vegetable garden was emerging from winter dormancy, and Maya had begun learning to tend it with the same careful attention he had once shown. Grace watched the world with wide eyes, fascinated by the dance of leaves overhead and the distant sound of cattle in neighboring pastures. She had no memory of the laboratory beneath their feet, now sealed and converted into a root cellar where Maya stored preserves made from her grandfather's apple trees. "Look at the clouds, sweetheart," Maya said, pointing at the sky where perfectly normal weather patterns painted cotton-white formations. "Just clouds, no interdimensional gateways. Isn't that wonderful?" Grace cooed her agreement, then promptly fell asleep against Maya's shoulder with the enviable peace of someone whose greatest concern was nap time. That afternoon, Maya spread a blanket in the garden and let Grace practice holding her head up while she weeded between the tomato plants. The work was meditative, grounding her in the simple reality of soil beneath her fingernails and sun warming her back. These were problems solved with water and patience, not cosmic sacrifice. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Chen. "Saw your latest assignment. Excellent work on the equine nutrition analysis. You haven't lost your touch." Maya smiled, remembering the girl who had once been so certain of her path, then so lost in poor choices and worse luck. That girl lived within her still, but tempered now by experience and strengthened by love. Grace had given her more than salvation from dimensional predators. She had given her the motivation to reclaim her dreams. As evening approached, Maya prepared dinner while Grace played in her bouncy seat, both of them comfortable in their routine. The farmhouse felt fully theirs now, filled with the pleasant chaos of real life. Burp cloths draped over chairs, veterinary textbooks stacked beside baby care manuals, the sweet disorder of a home where learning and growing happened side by side. Maya's reflection in the kitchen window showed a woman transformed, but not by cosmic forces. This transformation had been earned through sleepless nights and patient days, through choosing hope over despair and love over fear. She looked like what she was: a mother, a student, a woman building a life worth living. Grace babbled from her seat, practicing the sounds that would someday become words. Maya wondered what stories her daughter would tell, what dreams she would chase, what choices she would make in a life blessedly free from predetermined destiny. "We did it, Grace," Maya whispered, lifting her daughter for their evening cuddle. "We found our way home." Outside, the Montana sky painted itself in sunset colors that owed nothing to dimensional instability and everything to the simple physics of light and atmosphere. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: a calculus assignment, Grace's first solid foods, decisions about the future they were building together. Maya settled into the rocking chair where she had first imagined this life was possible. Grace nestled against her heart, perfect in her ordinary humanity, loved beyond measure for exactly who she was. This was their new beginning, not written in cosmic significance, but in daily choices to love, to grow, and to trust in tomorrow's gentle promise.